The question of how India should pursue its claim on Pakistan, administered Kashmir, known in India as Pakistan, occupied Kashmir, sits at the intersection of history, law, and deterrence. The dispute began when the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir acceded to India on October 26, 1947, after armed incursions from Pakistan-based tribesmen pushed its ruler to seek military assistance from New Delhi. India cites this instrument of accession as the core legal title to the entire former princely state. Following months of war, the United Nations Security Council called in Resolution 47 of April 1948 for a ceasefire, withdrawal of forces, and a plebiscite to ascertain the people's will, steps that were never completed and are still read in sharply different ways in New Delhi and Islamabad. After another war and the redrawing of a ceasefire line, India and Pakistan signed the Simla Agreement on July 2, 1972, converting the old ceasefire line into the line of control and committing that outstanding issues would be resolved bilaterally. India argues that Simla made bilateralism the exclusive framework, limiting scope for third-party roles and reframing earlier UN prescriptions. Pakistan argues that UN resolutions remain operative. The text of Simla, still referenced by both states, anchors this contest of legal narratives. In August 2019, India revoked Jammu and Kashmir's special status under Article 370 and reorganized the state into two federally administered territories. New Delhi framed the move as an internal legal act meant to deepen integration and improve governance. Critics inside and outside India warned of rights curbs and demographic anxieties. While Pakistan condemned the step as unilateral, the policy shift intensified diplomatic friction and fed periodic military crises along the line of control. Despite these shocks, the two militaries reaffirmed a ceasefire along the line of control in February 2021, which reduced cross-border firing for a time and showed that calibrated dialogue between professional channels remains possible even amid rancor. Yet spikes of violence, most recently deadly attacks in Indian, administered Kashmir and swift retaliatory cycles, have underscored how quickly escalation risks can return and how fragile any deterrent equilibrium is between two nuclear-armed neighbors. Against this backdrop, force versus legal framework is not a purely binary choice. A force-first approach would test international norms against acquisition of territory by war and carry outsized escalation risks. A law-first approach grounded in India's claim via accession, the post-1970, to bilateral template and incremental confidence building, seeks durable legitimacy but can be slow and vulnerable to spoilers on the ground. The prudent path for a speech is to weigh both tracks, India's juridical foundations and constitutional actions, the bilateral obligations it says govern the dispute, the humanitarian and rights dimensions that shape international opinion, and the deterrence realities that constrain military options. With these frames, the audience can examine whether pursuing Pakistan-administered areas through coercion would be strategically self-defeating, or whether anchoring claims in law, diplomacy, and lived improvements for people across the line of control offers a more credible route to long-term integration and stability. India's legal case begins with the instrument of accession, signed by Maharaja Hari Singh and accepted by the Governor-General, which, like other princely accessions, transferred defense, external affairs, and communications to the Dominion of India, with constitutional relationship evolving thereafter. New Delhi's position is that this act conferred full sovereignty over the entire former princely state, making Pakistan's subsequent presence across the old ceasefire line an illegal occupation. Pakistan counters that the accession was conditional and that the people's will, envisaged in UN Security Council Resolution 47, remains unfulfilled. UN texts are often invoked but rarely agreed upon. Resolution 47 called for staged demilitarization beginning with Pakistani withdrawal, followed by Indian reduction and a plebiscite sequencing that produced deadlock over compliance and Verification. Later Council and Commission decisions reiterated the framework, but could not overcome facts created by successive wars. India argues that post-1972, the Simla Agreement supplanted earlier multilateral tracks by committing both sides to bilateral resolution and by recognizing the line of control as the de facto boundary pending settlement. Pakistan accepts Simla, but denies it extinguished UN competence. The Simla text's bilateralism is thus India's central first lever. A further legal pillar for India is its 2019 constitutional reorganization that revoked special status and placed Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh under direct federal administration. Domestically, New Delhi casts this as consolidating the union and harmonizing rights. Externally, critics argue it prejudges the dispute and curtails protections. In any legal, diplomatic campaign for Pakistan-administered areas, India would stress accession plus Simla, Pakistan would press plebiscite language and human rights findings. The speech should convey that durable legitimacy in international forums tends to favor negotiated, bilateral settlements anchored in existing treaties rather than territorial change by force, especially where nuclear risk is present and humanitarian optics weigh heavily on global opinion. The use of force option risks, thresholds, and deterrence a force-centric strategy to recover. Pakistan-administered territory would collide with the UN Charter's prohibition on the use of force against territorial integrity, except in self-defense, and would meet immediate Pakistani resistance under a nuclear shadow. Even limited punitive raids risk rapid horizontal and vertical escalation, given dense deployments, short warning times, and highly salient domestic politics on both sides. Episodes in recent years illustrate this latter: terror attacks producing public pressure, cross-border strikes, air engagements, and artillery duels along the line of control. While militaries on both sides have mechanisms to cap crises, the margin for miscalculation is narrow. Recent reporting on deadly attacks in Indian-administered Kashmir and ensuing cross-border strikes shows how quickly deterrence can strain despite ceasefire understandings. There is also the problem of ends and means. Even if India could impose costs through precision strikes or limited ground actions, translating battlefield effects into stable control over populated terrain would require sustained occupation. Policing and governance under fire expensive in blood, treasure, and legitimacy. International reaction would likely harden, inviting censure and potential economic headwinds at a time when India seeks investment and global leadership roles. The 2021 recommitment to the line of control ceasefire demonstrated that both militaries can reduce violence when politically authorized. A deliberate breach to pursue territorial change would forfeit that stability dividend and could divert resources from modernization priorities. Finally, domestic resilience matters. Force options would likely trigger mobilization cycles, information operations, and retaliatory terrorism. Civilian vulnerability along the frontier, well documented in past flare-ups, would rise, eroding the narrative of responsible stewardship that India has cultivated. For a speech audience, the takeaway is sober. Coercion can signal resolve and punish cross-border militancy, but using force to alter control across the line of control would invite severe strategic, legal, and humanitarian costs with uncertain prospects of durable gain. Law-first pathways, bilateralism, rights, and confidence, building a legal framework. Strategy would fuse three tracks. First, treaty-anchored bilateralism under the Simla Agreement remains India's strongest normative ground. It locks both sides into dialogue without third-party mediation, prizes incremental agreements, and normalizes the line of control pending settlement. Operationalizing that means sustained military-to-military communications, border, incident mechanisms, and compartmentalized talks on trade, travel, and humanitarian issues even during political chill. The 2021 One ceasefire reaffirmation by directors, general of military operations, is a template for pragmatic steps that lower violence and create negotiating space. Second, domestic legality and rights. India's 2019 reorganization is the governing reality it presents to the world. To make a law first case persuasive, New Delhi must pair constitutional assertions with measurable improvements, due process safeguards, transparent security operations, economic opportunity, and cross low-C people to people links. International media coverage in the immediate aftermath highlighted curfews, detentions, and information blackouts. Addressing these critiques with verifiable benchmarks can reduce external skepticism and strengthen India's claim of responsible governance. Third, humanitarian confidence, building across the line of control, expanding travel permits, medical corridors, cultural exchanges, and disaster cooperation yields reputational gains at low cost. History suggests such steps survive only when insulated from spoilers. Therefore, institutionalizing ceasefire hotlines fast, moving investigative teams for incidents, and time-bound reviews of alleged violations are essential. Internationally, India can lean on its accession plus Simla narrative while framing any third-party role as strictly technical, for example, World Bank-style facilitation on infrastructure or water, rather than political mediation, consistent with its long-standing stance against outside brokers. The objective is cumulative: shrink violence, grow normalcy, and let legality be seen in the everyday lives of people on both sides of the line of control, so that, over time, claims are validated not only by documents but by lived legitimacy, scenarios, and a strategic recommendation. 3 scenarios merit outlining. In a coercive scenario, another mass casualty attack triggers punitive Indian strikes, Pakistani retaliation, and rapid escalation, with international pressure forcing a return to the status quo ante but at higher humanitarian and economic cost. In a stalemate scenario, low violence persists under the 2021 ceasefire understandings, while hard political positions remain. In a legal diplomatic scenario, both sides quietly widen the ceasefire into a rules of the road regime, reopen limited trade and travel, and pilot low-C development projects. India consolidates governance gains and emphasizes accession plus Simla in every forum, building a record of restraint and competence. Recent episodes show both the perils of escalation and the value of back-channel management. They also show how quickly public tragedies can upend diplomatic groundwork. A recommendation for a speech audience: India should lead with law, not force. Center the instrument of accession as title, the Simla Agreement as process, and the 2021 ceasefire as proof of concept. Pair this with transparency and rights, positive governance in Jammu and Kashmir to strengthen international confidence after the 2019 changes. Keep a calibrated deterrent reserving proportionate time-bound force strictly for self-defense against imminent threats, while avoiding any campaign aimed at territorial change across the line of control. International law, global markets, and nuclear prudence all reward restraint backed by capability. Over years, a visibly improving reality on India's side of the line of control, plus disciplined bilateralism, offers a more credible path to realizing claims than any military thrust that could ignite a conflagration.